The US has just been kicked off the energy throne by Canada and Qatar. While the US keeps shouting about America first, Canada and Qatar have left the US, shifting their natural gas to Europe and Asia. The result, gas prices are soaring and the energy industry is declining. Now, the US is left with just the shell of its former power. Let's take a moment and think about an energy revolution no one saw coming. Qatar and Canada, two countries you'd never think of when mentioning the heart of global energy, are boldly challenging the US. Canada is now serious about large natural gas export projects. Qatar, not to be outdone, has signed long-term contracts worth billions of USD with European countries. And what about the US? All we can do is sit back, watching gas prices soar while our wallets keep getting emptier by the day. The US, once the energy giant of the world, is now at risk of falling behind in the global energy race. These billion-dollar deals could force the US to face an unbelievable reality. One day we'll have to buy natural gas from Qatar and Canada. When it comes to global energy strategy, Canada and Qatar are playing the right game. They're not just extracting resources, they're creating a perfect supply chain and strategy. They know how to get major countries like Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands to bypass the US and sign huge gas deals. And the US? While we're fumbling with tariffs and theories on protecting domestic production, smaller countries like Qatar and Canada have signed billion-dollar deals with European partners. And behind these deals is something the US can't find in its own policies: a long-term collaboration strategy. The US, a country that can't even decide what its strengths are. While energy giants are determined to capture the largest part of the market, imagine, while we're facing gas prices soaring to $6 per gallon, Canada and Qatar are signing billion-dollar contracts with global partners. Are we missing out on opportunities? In 2017, Trump thought imposing tariffs on gas from Canada was a smart strategy. But what's the outcome? Canada and Qatar are no longer taking it. They've realized that the US isn't their only partner and quickly turned to countries willing to pay higher prices. Now, the US is facing the consequences of its tariff policies, with gas prices soaring and 40,000 energy jobs lost. And don't forget, Texas and Louisiana, Trump's strongholds, are the hardest hit by this decision. The US missed its opportunity and may soon have to sell wheat to others, even though we own vast resources. But can Trump realize his mistakes before everything falls into the hands of Qatar and Canada? Qatar is no longer a small player. They're rising strongly, increasing their gas production to 110 million tons per year. They've signed long-term contracts with major European countries worth billions of USD. In Canada, they didn't miss the opportunity. The LNG project in British Columbia is booming, and gas exports from Canada to Europe and Japan are increasing rapidly. As a result, these countries are not only securing energy supplies, but also creating thousands of new jobs and boosting their local economies. Meanwhile, the US is watching these countries develop and asking, what can we do to catch up with them? The US has it all: resources, technology, and the capacity to succeed in the energy sector. But what's happening? We have shale gas, but the extraction costs are so high that you'd think we're mining gold instead of gas. Sadly, the US hasn't invested in advanced technology, choosing instead to follow the path of tariffs. While Qatar and Canada get stronger every day, the US remains still, waiting for some miracle reform without daring to change its strategy. What can the US do? The answer is, probably, wait until we run out of gas.
500 megawatts of electricity and a multi-million-dollar deal between Canada and the US? Gone. Canada just terminated one of its most critical power export contracts, shaking up the entire energy landscape. So, what does this mean for regions like Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Ontario? Manitoba Premier, Wab Kinew, just made a move that no one saw coming. He issued a direct executive order, forcing Manitoba Hydro to terminate 2 major power export contracts with Northern States Power, a U.S. arm of Cell Energy based in Minneapolis. These deals, set to expire by the end of April 2025, were delivering over 500 megawatts of clean, stable hydroelectric energy. directly into the U.S. grid. But this isn't just business as usual. This is a strategic shakeup in Manitoba's energy future. By invoking executive authority, Premier Kinyu is sending a loud message. Manitoba is done being dependent. It's time for energy sovereignty and economic control to come home. This decision marks a critical turning point, and it's raising big questions about the future of U.S.-Canada energy relations. With this bold move, Manitoba is reclaiming the electricity once exported to the U.S. and redirecting it into the domestic grid. 50 megawatts will go to Nunavut, a vast northern territory with high energy demand, but limited infrastructure. This effort is part of the $1.66 billion Kavalik Hydrofiber Project, a landmark initiative that will deliver clean hydropower and broadband access to remote communities. It's a game changer, replacing polluting diesel generators with reliable, sustainable energy solutions. Meanwhile, the remaining 450 megawatts will be transferred to Saskatchewan and Ontario. This strategic reallocation supports the creation of national energy corridors, designed to reduce dependence on foreign supply and strengthen Canada's internal energy stability. It's not just a redirection, it's a reinforcement of Canada's long-term vision for a more resilient and sustainable energy future. But let's be clear, not everything is running smoothly. This decision by Manitoba Hydro comes with a price. Electricity exports were a major revenue stream. Shifting that power to the domestic market means losing a high-profit income source. And Manitoba Hydro's financial health? It's already under pressure. The company is currently carrying a massive $25 billion in debt, with a long-term plan to invest $31 billion into infrastructure over the next 20 years. To make up for these losses, Manitoba Hydro is now proposing a rate hike, up to 11% over the next 3 years, starting in 2026, followed by annual increases of 3.5%. That's a big burden, especially for households and businesses, already struggling with rising inflation and higher living costs. What was meant to be a path to energy independence could also lead to a new wave of financial strain at home. Not everyone is on board. Several experts and critics, including Lauren Stone from PC Hydro, are sounding the alarm. The shift from a high-profit export market to the more volatile domestic market comes with serious financial risks. The worry? Domestic customers may not be able or willing to pay prices high enough to keep Manitoba Hydro financially stable. And raising electricity rates? That's not an easy fix. Communities are already struggling with economic pressure and the rising cost of living. But that's not all. There's another major concern on the horizon. As part of its plan to boost winter energy capacity, Manitoba Hydro is considering adding gas turbines. That's right, fossil fuels. A move that directly contradicts Canada's pledge to phase out carbon-based energy by 2035. This could undercut Canada's climate goals, while putting Manitoba Hydro in a tough spot, trying to balance environmental responsibility with energy security. It's a tense dilemma, and it's pushing the company and the country into a very difficult debate. 12,500 people in Idaho, a packed arena, not for sports, not for music, but to hear something that's been hidden for far too long. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, reminded the public that Donald Trump was convicted on 34 counts of criminal fraud and was also found civilly liable for. While she did not deliver a harsh condemnation, she didn't yell. She simply said,
"When he talks about and criminals, he should look in the mirror."
Then came the bigger questions. AOC questioned whether Trump's chaotic tariff policies were more than just economic blunders. She suggested they were strategically timed to benefit insiders, people who bought low and profited off national panic.
with Trump's corrupt and disastrous and rushed tariff scheme. We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene buy that dip. I got one question for her. How much did you make? How much did you make off of people's despair? How much did you make off that panic? How much did you make off of that suffering? No more. We can't accept it.
The trust in our economic system, something many of us have spent our lives defending, is being eroded, and that deserves a serious reckoning. In the United States, the right to a fair trial is one of the nation's core principles. However, AOC issued a serious warning. When a leader expresses openness to detaining American citizens abroad without trial, it is no longer a political issue. It is a direct blow to the Constitution.
We just saw President Trump express openness to taking U.S. citizens and sending them off without due process to foreign prisons. It's anti-American.
But the concern goes far beyond theory. AOC cited specific cases. An activist detained thousands of miles from home with no evidence, no conviction, simply for joining a protest. A student warned by school officials for writing an article that shared personal views. An immigrant, an LGBTQ+ individual, a history teacher. Each one threatened, fired, or monitored, not for breaking the law, but for speaking their minds, or simply living as themselves. She described this as a growing pattern of repression, where human rights come second to security, where protest is seen as disruption, and where the most vulnerable become the first targets. And she emphasized, this is not the story of one side or one group of people.
It will always be the people, the masses, who refuse to comply with authoritarian regimes, who are the last and strongest defense of our country and our freedoms. It is you.
In her speech in Idaho, AOC delivered a clear observation. Trump is not an exception. He is the result of a system dominated by money and the wealthy elite. She warned of a system where billionaires like Elon Musk and major corporations don't just lobby. They finance political campaigns, they influence powerful committees, and in doing so, they directly shape national policy. Decisions that can change the lives of millions, from healthcare to energy to taxes, are increasingly controlled by those with financial interests tied to the outcome of those very policies.
Just look at what Republicans have been quietly doing in Congress, voting to advance cuts on hundreds of billions of dollars from Medicaid and veterans benefits, so they can take that money and give it to billionaires in the form of tax cuts and sweetheart government contracts to their own companies like SpaceX.
And finally, she made it clear, we cannot change this country unless we change the system that lets money dominate power. The story of $880 billion in Medicaid cuts was not presented by AOC through dry statistics, but through cold, uncomfortable truth. While people struggling with medical conditions are treated as burdens, billionaires receive $4.5 trillion in tax breaks. It may sound like smart economics if you're investing in yachts or the stock market, but for someone barely affording insulin, it's a one-way ticket to a crisis. And the excuse about healthy people abusing Medicaid? AOC pointed out, only 2% actually fall into that category, which means the other 98% are paying the price for a grossly inflated excuse. Cutting Medicaid is not simply a matter of budget balancing. It's a matter of priorities between public health and private interests. And according to AOC, that is a deeply flawed choice. 12,500 people in Nampa didn't just come to cheer. They came because they wanted to be heard and seen. In a state often referred to as a conservative stronghold, a member of Congress being welcomed with such enthusiasm is no small matter. I come to Idaho because you matter. And that line resonated, not because it was emotional, but because it felt genuine. Not everyone lives in New York or California, but every resident of Idaho deserves the right to be heard, the right to access health care, and the right to feel that they are part of a larger story.
$5 trillion, an enormous figure, has evaporated quickly. What happened? Trump's tariff policy causes market instability. Trump's tariff policy is the root cause of it all. The US dollar is weakening dramatically, markets are plunging, and the world is turning its back on these policies. And here are the numbers you can't ignore. Trump initiated the trade war by imposing a 25% tariff on goods from China and other countries. However, the real price to pay has been steep. $5 trillion were wiped out from the stock market just 48 hours after the tariff announcement. These numbers are not just milestones. They are clear evidence of the instability this policy has caused. Over the past period, the S&P 500 has dropped 600 points. The Dow Jones lost nearly 4,000 points, and millions of investors have watched their assets evaporate quickly. Investors are in panic, and this has made global financial markets more unpredictable than ever before. Never has the market fallen into such a state due to a single political decision. EU and China assert their power. While Trump imposes high tariffs on imported goods, China didn't just retaliate. They raised tariffs to 125% on American products. This means that a range of products like cars, computers, and electronics will become more expensive for American consumers. Not to mention, China has been actively seeking to promote alternative currencies and reduce reliance on the US dollar. The EU didn't stay on the sidelines either. They've taken strong countermeasures and are starting to build new trade alliances, reducing dependence on the US. Countries within the EU are focusing on finding new markets in Asia and South America. Trump's policies have made these countries no longer subjugated, but instead, they are now asserting their own economic power. These alliances are not just long-term strategies, but also signals of a shift in the global power balance. While the US continues to isolate itself, other nations are strengthening new strategic partnerships to enhance their influence and foster sustainable development. This is not just a reaction to America's policies, but a strategic move to create a multipolar world. These countries are expanding their influence and preparing for a future that no longer depends on the old powers. The erosion of trust among allies. America's closest allies are starting to feel a loss of trust in Trump. Canada, Mexico, and EU nations are beginning to seek bilateral trade agreements with other partners, such as China and ASEAN. This creates a major concern for Trump's America First policy, as key partners are gradually leaving and seeking more independence in trade. For example, Canada has started to renegotiate trade agreements with countries like China, as they can no longer endure America's unpredictable trade policies. The EU is also looking to build new relationships, reducing dependence on the conditions set by Washington. This shows that countries are seeking more independence in trade policies and no longer relying on decisions from Washington. America's policies are gradually eroding traditional alliances and driving the formation of new economic blocs. The rise of new currencies. As the US dollar weakens, alternative currencies are quickly rising. The euro has become a safer choice for investors, especially as countries begin to invest more in these currencies. China is also relentlessly pushing to strengthen the yuan, aiming to replace the dollar's role in international trade. The reality is clear. Countries and financial organizations are reducing their reliance on the US dollar and looking for more stable investment channels. This shift is not only changing the flow of currencies, but also creating a major transformation in international transactions. Countries are gradually abandoning the US dollar and shifting to the euro, yuan, or even digital currencies. This reflects a shift in global financial strategy as countries seek more stability and independence. In the future, the US dollar may no longer be the preferred choice for international transactions. These alternative currencies are gradually becoming the new power in the global market. Does Trump realize the situation? So does Trump realize it? $5 trillion have vanished, the US dollar is weakening, and allies are turning away. His tariff policies are causing severe weakness, not only to the US economy, but also to the global political landscape. The US dollar is no longer the king of currencies, and Trump's policies are making other countries seek new deals, creating their own paths for independent development. If this continues, the US will face long-lasting economic and political consequences. This change is not only affecting countries, but also shaking confidence in the strength of the US economy on the global stage. The collapse of the US dollar will directly impact global financial stability. Other countries are ready to fill the gap left by America and take control of key markets.
I'm just notifying John Deere right now. If you do that, we're putting a 200% tariff on everything that you want to sell into the United States.
John Deere, the symbol of American agriculture, recently caused a stir when it decided to move some of its production to Mexico. This could have a huge impact on Trump's America First policy, which he once promised to uphold. Immediately, he reacted fiercely, threatening a 200% tariff on John Deere products made in Mexico.
John Deere is going to, and anybody else that does this, because it's hurting our farmers, it's hurting our manufacturing. And if you do that, you're going to have a 200% tariff put on the product that you make in Mexico, right across the border. They think they're going to make product.
But this move wasn't as simple as Trump thought. It could have unexpected consequences for the entire U.S. agriculture industry. For Trump, John Deere's move to outsource production is a betrayal. A company so deeply tied to America now searching for profits elsewhere? No surprise that he threatened to impose a 200% tariff on every product from Mexico. But John Deere wasn't shaken. They continued to defend their decision, stating it's a necessary move to remain competitive in the global market. While Trump tries to intimidate, John Deere has shown that American companies can expand globally without being locked in by domestic protectionist policies. With rising production costs in the U.S., moving production to Mexico was a matter of survival for John Deere. In the U.S., labor costs are twice as high as in Mexico, and if they want to remain competitive, expanding into emerging markets is absolutely necessary. Markets like Brazil, India, and China are increasingly demanding agricultural equipment, and if John Deere doesn't act, they'll be left behind. That's why Trump's high tariffs aren't just a threat to the manufacturing industry. They could also put U.S. companies at a severe disadvantage in the global race. What's interesting is that this showdown isn't just about politics and tariffs. It's also a reflection of a big shift in the agriculture industry. Automation technology is gradually replacing traditional labor. GPS-controlled tractors, harvesting done by AI-powered machines, and drones scanning fields are no longer a novelty. But while technology is changing the game, Trump's protectionist policies seem to be holding on to an outdated economy, only deepening the divide in the agriculture sector. John Deere has proven that they're not afraid to face the pressure from Trump. This company understands that to stay competitive, they must expand globally. But will this force Trump to change his policies? That question remains unanswered. However, one thing is certain: if John Deere wins this battle, many other American companies will follow suit, making it even harder to protect domestic production than ever before.
But they're going to have to pay a tremendous tariff, which means two things. They're not going to build the plant. If it's not too late, they're not going to build the plant. This country is going to make a lot of money. Or they're going to build the plant, but they're going to build it in the United States somewhere, and ideally a place like Michigan or South Carolina, where we have a lot of auto business. But we're not going to let that happen.
The showdown between John Deere and Trump isn't just about tariffs and protectionist policies. It's the story of the U.S. economy facing an unavoidable change. If Trump wins, companies will be controlled by protectionist policies. But if John Deere wins, a big shift in how the U.S. economy operates will begin.
The cost of equipment has just gone through the roof to buy anything like that, because it just would be cost prohibitive.
In the end, it's the American consumers who will pay the price as food and agricultural product prices rise due to these protectionist policies. This could force Americans, especially low-income families, to face higher living costs, particularly for essential items like food. As a result, this trade war won't just affect companies and trade policies. It will directly impact the daily lives of the American people.
No missiles, no tanks. China just activated a different kind of weapon, a financial weapon, worth $1.2 trillion. And this one doesn't explode, it silently moves money, from dollars to digital yuan. The ECNY, or digital yuan, isn't just a virtual version of cash. It's a cross-border payment ecosystem, encrypted, programmable, and possibly re-engineering the financial world order from the ground up. Based on figures reportedly attributed to the People's Bank of China, the system is said to have processed over 1.8 trillion yuan, approximately 250 billion US dollars, during its pilot phase as of Q1 2025. Detailed figures haven't been publicly verified, and third-party validation remains limited. Still, what matters here is not just transaction volume, but a shift in who controls the flow of money itself. If the dollar was once the crown of global finance, then ECNY may be crafting a remote control for that crown and quietly taking aim. While the rest of the world is still debating whether to raise or lower interest rates, China simply unplugged from SWIFT. Today, 38% of China's global trade no longer goes through SWIFT. Instead, it runs on CIPS, a homegrown payment network that now connects over 1,400 financial institutions across more than 110 countries. No New York banks, no dollars, no waiting. In Kenya, oil was purchased with yuan. In Argentina, an IMF loan was partially repaid in yuan because the country had simply run out of dollars. In Southeast Asia, 33% of regional trade with China now flows in non-dollar currencies. In just 2 years, the yuan's share of global transactions jumped from 1.9% to 6%, a threefold leap, not out of idealism, but out of necessity. This isn't a global financial revolution made in protest. It's one made in survival mode. Think of SWIFT as the world's post office. It sends the message, but not the money. Now imagine ECNY as a 1-hour delivery service. It not only sends the message, but delivers the funds in real time, no intermediaries involved. A pilot test between Hong Kong and the UAE showed invoices settled in seconds, costs reduced by up to 98%. And today, CIPS handles over $83 billion in transactions every single day. No longer a test. This is live, programmable, fully operational. If the global financial system is a high-speed train, China isn't just laying down the tracks. They own the stations, the tickets, and the conductors. Make no mistake. ECNY isn't a decentralized cryptocurrency. It's state-issued, monitored, and, if necessary, reversible. In Malaysia, local fast payment systems are now directly linked with China's ECNY. In Indonesia, small businesses are adopting QR ECNY wallets to bypass dollar conversion delays. And in the Belt and Road Initiative, 13 countries are already using ECNY to pay for infrastructure projects like Kenya's Mombasa, Port Laos's high-speed rail, and Pakistan's Gwadar deep-sea terminal. Some of these projects now even run on smart contracts, where debt repayments are automated and retractable if partners deviate from terms. The global financial system is becoming a driverless train. The question is, who is holding the remote? In January 2025, the US imposed a blanket 60% tariff on all Chinese imports, a bold move. But China didn't respond with counter tariffs. Instead, it accelerated ECNY integration into export trade. Compared to the previous year, digital yuan usage in trade rose by 19.3%. Letters of credit in yuan are now up to 40 basis points cheaper than dollar-based equivalents, making Beijing's option more attractive for global exporters. This isn't a trade war like we've seen before. This is a software upgrade race, where one side uses algorithms and the other is still rewriting tax rules. China isn't trying to win the tariff game. They're building a financial firewall, one that dollars may no longer pass through. $38 billion from Meta, $101 billion from Apple, $100 billion from Google, all from Europe. Trump raised tariffs. The EU clapped back, not with steel or sedans, but by going straight for America's Achilles heel. April 2025, Trump, finger pointed westward, stood at the podium and declared, "I'm slapping a 20% tariff on all EU goods. They're bleeding America dry." It sounded like a blockbuster movie. Then the numbers showed up and killed the climax. European Commission, that's just wrong. WTO, statistical nonsense. Economists, it's math you get when a fifth grader guesses on a trade test. Reality check. The EU imposes an average tariff of only 1% to 4.8% on US goods. So where did Trump pull the 39% number from? Simple. In 2024, the US ran a $235.6 billion trade deficit with the EU, importing $605.8 billion worth of goods. Divide the two, and voila, 38.9%. Round it up. A number? Yes, a real tariff rate. Not even close. Trump screams about being exploited, but the US is the one cashing the check. The real question isn't who taxed whom. It's who's playing the global leverage game better. The EU didn't retaliate with wines or steel. They didn't hit the warehouse. They went straight for the data vault. Big tech, America's pride and profit, also happens to be its most exposed nerve. Europe doesn't have a Google of Brussels or an Apple Europe edition. But guess what? They control the playground. And this time, they didn't kick the shins. They tightened the noose. No bullets, no smoke, just law. Let's break it down. Meta pulled in $38.36 billion from Europe. That's over 23% of its global revenue. Google, or should we say Alphabet, raked in $100+ billion from the EU and EMEA. Apple banked $101.3 billion. That's 26% of total revenue. With $42 billion in operating profits, Amazon made $43.4 billion in Q4 2024 international sales, mostly from Europe. They can't leave Europe. Leaving means losing market share. Losing market share means losing dominance, and losing dominance, well, big tech stops being big. Brussels doesn't launch missiles. They file legislation. First cut, data with GDPR and the EU Data Act. The message was crystal clear. Our data, our rules. Google, hand over the algorithm. Amazon, don't even think about exporting your warehouse insights. Meta? Might have to share user emotions with a rival from Berlin. Without data, big tech is just a sports car without gas. Second cut, digital taxes. The EU looks at app stores, YouTube ads, and says, who's making money here and dodging taxes? 3% tax on total revenue. Profit or not, doesn't matter. Google earns $1 billion, pay $30 million just for showing up. Third strike, sector-specific targeting. No blind swings. They aim where it hurts most: AI, EVs, and batteries. The sectors where America is printing gold. EU demands battery sourcing transparency, CO2 tracking, even proof that your AI doesn't have bias. They're not blocking you. They're burying you. In clauses, subclauses, and footnotes. Final move, the ACI stealth strike anti-coercion instrument. Sounds like a spy thriller, right? Reality. Sorry, American companies can't bid, and that patent? It's conditionally accessible. No blood, no boom, but every clause, a sleepless night for USCEOS and their lawyers. This isn't a trade war anymore. It's a war over who defines power in the digital age. The EU doesn't need to shout. They write, and the world reads, and the US, still rich, but no longer the rule maker. Big tech, still huge, but now they're playing on someone else's field.